Hi, and welcome to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast, your serving of wine trends and passionate people beyond the bottle. I'm Christina Pickard, the contributing editor here at Wine Enthusiast for Australia and New Zealand. In this episode, I'll be chatting to Christopher Tanghe, an award-winning master sommelier and the chief instructor for the international educational organization GuildSomm. We'll be talking all about New Zealand wines, other than Sauvignon Blanc. New Zealand may be known for its boisterous Sauvignon, but this beautiful New World country is far from a one-trick pony. In this episode, Chris and I will cover some well-known varieties as well as some surprises. We'll also reveal some of our favorite New Zealand wines and styles. And we highlight 3 wines highly rated in the Wine Enthusiast Buying Guide. Christopher, thanks so much for talking to me today. I know you're a busy, globe-trotting, wine-educating guy, so I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here for sure.
You were recently in New Zealand, and you've been teaching some classes through GuildSomm on New Zealand wines, is that correct?
We will be in early 2020. So this trip was to go and learn about the region and taste a wider array of wines to prepare for that class, which will be starting in probably February of 2020.
Cool. That's very exciting. So, New Zealand, let's dive in. It is a big Sauvignon Blanc producing country. It's a country that's really kind of carved its reputation off that grape variety. It's still, I don't even know the exact percentage, but something between like 70 and 80% of all wines come from this grape variety. Majority of the production comes from Marlborough, but we're going to talk today about everything but Sauvignon Blanc because that does get a lot of coverage, and rightly so, because there is so much made, but there's so much more out there. And we'll start with the grape variety that is probably the second most known, which is Pinot Noir. And even though it is a grape variety that has that really has a great reputation within New Zealand, it's still relatively small production on the global scale. But I think what does get produced from that grape variety is just of such enormous quality. And I hope that you also found that when you were there.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say, just before we dive into that, real quickly,
Sure.
Just one little anecdote about Sauvignon Blanc, because I think it's really important, and it's something that really moved me when I was there, was that I think the bulk of the kind of identity of what people think of Sauvignon Blanc is that it's kind of the porch pounder, coiffer type style, right? And that it always has to be loud, kind of jalapeno, that super ripe pyrazine style, which, yes, that style obviously is very prevalent and important to the image of New Zealand and Sauvignon Blanc. But there's also a whole host of other examples that are really pushing the boundaries of what people of that image, and I think that in the years down the line, we're going to see New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc definitely being confused in blind tastings for other famous regions of Sauvignon Blanc in the world. So I'll just leave it at that.
Agreed. That's a very good point. I completely agree. It's certainly not as much of a one-trick pony, and it's as people think it is, and it's it's an exciting category, I think, and more so than it's given credit for amongst the wine community. So glad you pointed it out.
Yeah, and with Marlborough in particular, I think that there's so much cool stuff going on there too, of course, within Sauvignon Blanc, but outside of Sauvignon Blanc, Pinot Noir being one of them, but also sparkling wines as well are really, really exciting coming out of there, and one of the most prominent sparkling wine producers, Number One Estate, is based there, and also varieties that no one ever thought could get ripe there. I was talking to a number of prominent producers that kind of focus on Sauvignon Blanc, and they said, oh yeah, back in the 70s we had Cabernet Sauvignon planted. Wasn't that silly? Ha 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 ha. And then you go to taste the wines of Hans Herzog, and that like totally shatters all, preconceptions of what should be grown or what can be grown. In
Hans Herzog being one of these producers that just experiments and plants everything, and so much of it works so well, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you look at his vineyard map, like what's planted where and what block, and it's bananas. There's just like everything that you would never expect. I mean, from Italian to Spanish to obscure French varieties, and then you're like, oh man, this is going to be a train wreck, and then you sit down and you taste the wines, and you're like, wow, these are really, really interesting and well made and delicious. And yeah, maybe they don't taste always like the classic regions from which they're from, but they're still delicious. And a number of them do taste like they should from a classic region. So not that everything has to taste like classic, but it was just really eye-opening. And I think that was one of the light bulb moments for me, like looking at other varieties and saying, whoa, there's a lot of potential here. So
yeah, I think that's exactly the right word, potential. And I think and sometimes it's a little bit frustrating, I think, even for the winemakers themselves, because, you'll taste the odd Riesling and Chenin Blanc and sparklings and go, why aren't you making more of this? You do it so well. And even they kind of go, Sauvignon Blanc. I think that they even feel a little bit stuck within this sort of mono variety called, it's a country that has just built such a reputation off of one grape variety, more so than probably anywhere else in the New World anyway, just in terms of like such a massive amount of what they produce is from this one variety. But, there's so much potential down there. And I think that, it is changing a little bit slowly, but I mean, that's partly why I wanted to do this podcast episode, to get people to know that, there's more out there. And yes, use New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc as a springboard, right? As a sort of gateway to also explore these other varieties, because the more that we drink them and buy them and talk about them, I think the more that then producers will maybe be given a little bit more liberty by the powers that be to say, hey, can we, try that Riesling that worked so well? Can we maybe, try that again this year, up the production or whatever, because it's such a blank canvas in a lot of ways. There's so much more that they could be doing there in terms of these other varieties, other cool climate varieties in particular. Anyway, we have digressed. Let's focus on Pinot Noir for a little while. Sure. I want to just use this one wine that is in our buying guide, and so listeners can kind of go back to the winemag.com website and go back to our buying guide and get my review and a little bit more of my take on it, but also to use as a launch pad to explore other wines, other Pinots from New Zealand, from this region, and from others. So the one we're going to start talking about is Escarpment. And the specific wine you can find in the buying guide is the 2017 Kiwa Single Vineyard from Martinborough. And I gave it 95 points. It's $60, so we're not talking an everyday, these wines that we're going to recommend today are not everyday drinking wines. But, I thought, look, let's talk about the good stuff and talk about why these guys are really leading the game. And then, we can give you alternatives. Are you familiar with Escarpment, I should say first? Do you know this wine?
I am. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I went there and met with Larry McKenna, and what I thought of Martinborough before going there was way different. It's actually a really concentrated and dense growing region, and it's not kind of as vast as a lot of the others, and kind of for whatever reason in the image in my head I had it being like a lot bigger, but it's essentially like this super cute little town that's all based on this square that has a lot of similarities to like Sonoma Square, and but it's smaller, and everyone knows each other, and it's all about Pinot Noir for the most part. I mean, you talk about monovarietal kind of wine culture. It's like that here, but with Pinot Noir for the most part. There are outliers, of course, of some really great like Alsace varieties, Germanic varieties from Dry River in particular, but Pinot Noir is the name of the game, and they're all being produced at a really, really high level for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I also had the same impression the first time I was in Martinborough, which confusingly, we should say that the region is actually the Wairarapa, and this can get very confusing in New Zealand because there's a lot of Ys. And the Wairarapa is the region that includes two other subregions there, but really Martinborough is kind of dominates there. And geographically, we're talking about just what is it, like an hour and a half outside of Wellington, down these like crazy nausea-inducing roads. Did you drive there, or did you take the train?
I did. I drove. Yeah, I drove from there to Wellington. It was so fun. I had a little, SUV, and I was wishing I had a Porsche or something. The roads are just magnificent, and there's actually still snow up there. on the
Wow.
roads too, because I was there, at the height of winter essentially. So I think that's also something that people maybe don't realize is that that whole spine of the Alps is really, really influential for all of these regions, because a lot of the weather comes up from the Antarctic and from these southerlies, and if you didn't have that spine of the Alps there, it would viticulture just wouldn't be possible.
Absolutely, they provide kind of a rain shadow. Same in Otago with the Southern Alps down there too. Yeah.
Yeah, a rain shadow, but also like a wind break, I think is even more so.
Yeah.
It's just
Although
like
Martinborough is
massive.
still so windy. Was it windy when you were there?
It was, yeah. It wasn't crazy windy, but yeah, they definitely talked about that.
They talk about it a lot. But no, I agree. It is a small region, and considering how much attention the wine world pays to it, I also considered it being, a much bigger region, because we're taught. I remember like way back with the WSETs being taught, that Martinborough was just a major Pinot Noir, region in the New World, and it still is, and rightfully so. And like you say, the level is so high, but it's actually so small. There's such a small, tiny amount of producers. You can sort of bike to 80% of them or something within.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's big part of the wine tourism there is like renting these bikes for people to cruise around, and it's also it's not only small by its geographical footprint, it's also small by viticultural pressures there. So average yield for Pinot Noir is 3 tons. Not per acre, per hectare. Okay, so for your listeners that need that in perspective, essentially, because we generally talk about tons per acre in the U.S. A hectare is 2.5 acres, essentially, 2.47 to be technical. So when you look at the yield spread across that larger footprint of land, it's nothing. It's so hard to make that pencil out. But they do it because they love it, and also it lends itself to really high quality. You don't have to have low yields to have high quality, but with Pinot Noir in particular, it really does make a difference, and that's because of the pressures of their climate and their soil, but their climate mainly for these low yields, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and they talk about the thick skins a lot of the berries there too. So I'm interested, I mean, I have an idea of the style of Pinot that I see from this region. I think it's a really distinctive style. Often when all the wines I'm tasting in the office are blind, and often when I'm doing a flight from there, I kind of know, I have a suspicion like, oh, I think this is Martinborough Pinot because it's got such distinctive tannin profile and such a spiciness. But how do you find it stylistically?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that overall they tend to be a little more muscly with tannin. Mm-hmm. They also tend to be kind of a little more perfumed and elegant at the same time when you compare it to certain parts of Otago. Those tend to be, because they're a bit more protected there, the wines tend to be a little bit more plush, whereas I feel like Martinborough is a little bit more perfumed and not quite as ripe as you would see in Central Otago generally. But yeah, tannin is, I think, the first and foremost, the quality that jumps out to me most, which also makes sense because of their high wind pressure and all of that.
Yeah, those thick skins, and I always describe them as sinewy or leathery. They're just they're a bit of a tough tannin, and often those wines they're meant for cellaring, and the price points reflect that too. Can I ask you, just because we're going to have to move on, just to give us, and this is a hard task, I know, but just to give us just a Cliff's Notes on some of the other Pinot producing regions. So let's say on Marlborough and Central Otago probably being the most well-known, on how you touched on a little bit, but like the style differences there. And then I just want to name some of my favorite producers from those regions and yours as well.
Mm-hmm. Also I would say Waipara or Canterbury would also be kind of, I think, it's not as well known because there's just not a critical mass of producers there yet. Yeah. There's still some really amazing wines being produced, most notably from Bell Hill. I really enjoyed those wines a lot. 2 paddocks and probably the most well-known Felton Road. Felton Road for me has always been a little bit of a roller coaster over the years in terms of, how I like the wines. And man, when I was there recently, they were just all on fire. So I don't know if it's just my own, changing, or if the wines have changed or not, but man, they were just so good this time around.
And Marlborough, for a long time, Marlborough had the reputation of producing much fruitier Pinot. I mean, this is the new world, so you are going to get more fruit forwardness than in Burgundy, for example, and it's different soils as well than in Oregon, and so you are going to get more fruit forwardness. But I think Marlborough has long had a reputation of being sort of the fruitiest of the of the Pinot producing regions. But I've actually found recently that, particularly with some of the producers who are working maybe in a more European style, like Clos Henri, for example, in Marlborough, are there, it can be hard to tell the difference sometimes between like Otago and Marlborough. So, and I guess I mean that as a compliment to Marlborough, that the wines are just getting more interesting, where I always kind of associated Otago as being the one with like a little more complexity, more like floral and savory and earthy notes. And now I'm seeing more of that from Marlborough. I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, if you taste of course, Clos Henri is just, the wines are incredible all across the board. And also Mahi, I really enjoyed his Pinot Noir quite a bit. And I think that, I would agree they're getting more in line with stylistically, but really it's about site more so than anywhere, more so than Otago, just because they're so exposed there in Marlborough. Sure. And so I think that's a big part of it for them, is finding the right places, and yes, vine age, but also clone is, I found, making a big difference too in terms of the finish style. So I think clones are important and not important at the same time. I think initially they make a big impact, and then there's really no substitute for time in the ground, because the vine will adapt and change, and the base material will have lesser and lesser influence as time goes on. So, the big thing for a lot of these regions, and more so in the north and in the south, is the Abel clone. Which for me has a lot of similarities to, if anyone's had like Wädenswil, which is a Swiss clone grown a lot in Oregon. But I often get this kind of citrusy type character on the wines, like blood orange or pink grapefruit or things like that. And for me, I was seeing, especially in the younger plantings, like that was the bigger influencer than, or maybe not bigger, but as big as the climate as well. But I would agree that Marlborough has really come a long way with Pinot. Some of them were still a little bit too quote unquote savory for me, depending on the vintage and the site. But in the right site, they can definitely be just as good as Otago. And I think in terms of stylistically, probably more acid driven than Otago, and for me overall less spicy is what my impressions were.
What's the hottest new trend in wine cellars? VinoView by Wine Enthusiast. VinoView will change how you cool and display your favorite wines. The patented matrix shelf design displays wine labels forward to showcase your favorite bottles. It comes standard with 12 built-in rolling shelves, each comfortably holding 12 750ml bottles of all shapes and sizes. With a 155 bottle capacity, VinoView is the only wine cellar of this type that can hold the number of bottles it advertises, guaranteed. And it's not only sleek in design, it also has a state-of-the-art compressor cooling performance. Wine Enthusiast VinoView is available exclusively from the Wine Enthusiast catalog. Visit wineenthusiast.com and find out why customers are calling VinoView awesome, beautiful, and a must-have product. To experience VinoView, visit wineenthusiast.com or call one of our experienced wine storage experts at 800-356-8466.
So let's move on now to Chardonnay, another really big topic that it's hard to just rush through. Chardonnay is not as prominent in New Zealand as it is in Australia, for example, where it's the most grown grape variety, and it's huge in Australia. But it is important in New Zealand, and like anywhere with Chardonnay, because it's such a blank slate of a grape variety, it is being made in all different ways. So it's really hard to say this is the style of Chardonnay in New Zealand.
I taste a lot of Chardonnay, and I liked the majority of it. I think that you do still see a few of those like really opulent kind of forward oaky / ripe styles, but for the most part, it's they're figuring it out. I mean, you have icons like Kumiu, kind of setting the stage for what Chardonnay in New Zealand should be, and I think a lot of people have looked to them, and of course to other producers outside of the country in both Australia, California, and obviously Burgundy. There's a lot of Burgundian influence for sure, and a lot of winemakers that have had the opportunity because of the opposite hemisphere to go work in a lot of northern hemisphere places that specialize in Chardonnay. But so I think they're making a lot of strides very quickly in terms of making top-notch Chardonnay. And like some ones that come to mind right away would be Tefera in Marlborough is really, really good. Again, Bell Hill, also Neudorf in Nelson, which is a region that's I think isn't given enough attention. Those are the ones that kind of pop out right away.
Yeah, Dry River do one.
Yeah, Dry River, of course.
Yeah. Tefera, I love that you mentioned Tefera or TWR because their aromatic whites just across the board are just awesome. Like they do a beautiful Riesling and Pinot Gris, and they're great. So I'm glad that you mentioned them. So the wine I threw at you for the specific wine, Pyramid Valley, I was like, that could go either way. It's a winery that I've adored for years. And of course we'll talk in a second about the transition with Pyramid Valley now, but I think it's long been a wine geek's wine, but it's definitely not for everybody. What are your feelings on Pyramid Valley?
Yeah, I feel like over the years I've either really loved the wine or been confused by the wine. And I've never disliked them. It's just kind of like, that's kind of a little crazy. But I think that the whole region is just really exciting for both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay.
Yeah, I agree. It's so just geographically, again, to get your bearings. So this is North Canterbury or Ypres, just north of Christchurch, like 45 minutes north. So it's pretty close. And the Pyramid Valley area, it's actually the area as well as the name of the wine, is kind of like off sort of on its own a little bit. I think it's west of North Canterbury, isn't it? And when you drive in, it's only like 15-minute drive or something, but it's like these giant limestone boulders, right? I was driving in like, oh my God, this is something from another world. And also just my thought was, why isn't this all just covered in vines?
Yeah.
It just felt like, wow, we're at the beginning of something, right? Like this is really, this should be much more planted than it is. But the two wineries that have been there and are making wine from there are Bell Hill and Pyramid Valley, and both of those are just such incredible producers. So I know it's kind of wanky now in the wine world to talk about like tasting terroir and wine, but these wines to me, the Pyramid Valley wines to me, they may not be polished and perfect, but they're always so expressive and soulful, and I guess that's why I wanted to talk about them today, because they're tiny producers. They're going to be less tiny. So the new owners, the Aotearoa New Zealand Fine Wine Estates, have taken them over, and they have some plans in the works to expand. And they're going to be sourcing some grapes from Otago. So they're going to be different wines in the future. So I think it's really cool now if you can get your hands on the Mike and Claudia wines, and then in a few years get the current wines, and just to see the difference and to see, it's just an interesting experiment. But
the wine that you picked, which was Field of Fire, which is absolute fire in the glass. It was so good. It was actually my favorite of the lineup of Chardonnay that they do. So they have the Field of Fire, and then they also have the Lion's Tooth.
Yes.
And for me, the Field of Fire was the one. It was just, and they're both good, but the Field of Fire was just like, it had some kind of new world, almost like verging into tropical elements, but they're all like tart tropical and like just enough of that tropicalness to give it like a lovely another layer of complexity on top of like the classic, citrus and tree fruit, etc. But also had like this herbal component that I really loved too. That was just, it made it just savory enough to be like, if I was tasting this blind, where would it be from? It's kind of a complex, definitely a complex wine in that way. So
totally agree. And you already mentioned Kumu River, another excellent Chardonnay producer who are kind of a little bit off on their own north of Auckland, but those are much more classic style wines and can be very long-lived wines, but those are definitely worth getting a hold of. Let's move rapidly on as we run out of time to Syrah. We're going to talk about Taimata here to start, and then we can talk about the Gimlet Gravels, because Taimata, I don't believe, and I could be wrong, maybe you can correct me here, are not really in the Gimlet Gravels. They have more sort of sandy loam over sandstone and over clay. So I don't think that they are Gimlet Gravels.
No, so, and actually where this wine originally was being sourced from was Bridgepaw. So Bridgepaw, the triangle, is actually outside of Gimlet Gravels. It's like, I believe, what direction is that? I think it's north and west a little bit.
Okay.
It's kind of it's outside like all the kind of quote unquote popular famous regions of Hawke's Bay, but these are coming from super old vines that are the second oldest in the country for Syrah, and now they are blending it with other sites in Gimlet Gravels. So like killer cool climate Syrahs. And with Hawke's Bay, I would say, like I talked about diversity before, this is probably one of the most diverse regions in all of the country. Just because of the landscape, as you can get really close to the sea here in terms of planting, or you can be tucked up into the hills, and there's all these offshoots of the hills that kind of create these special terroirs that are in some cases quite a bit warmer. And then you pair that with the soils. Like Gimlet Gravels is just that, and just these big alluvial fans of influences from rivers over the years, and they're super deep. I mean, in some areas this gravel goes way down, like 15 feet.
What's kind of cool about Gimlet Gravels too is that it's one of the only New World wine regions where the boundaries of the region are actually demarcated from soil type. I think that's a good place to wrap things up. We covered a lot of ground, right? It's a big conversation. New Zealand is a really exciting winemaking country, and there's so much more out there, even within the Sauvignon Blanc category. And I was glad that we at least were able to scratch the surface of some of the other amazing varieties and regions and winemakers that are out there and worth seeking out. So thank you, Chris. I appreciate you sharing a little sliver of your immense knowledge of the wine world with us.
Anytime. Happy to do so. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Wine Enthusiast Podcast. We hope we inspired you to pick up a bottle of New Zealand Pinot, Chardonnay, or Syrah. Here are the 3 recently reviewed wines that were mentioned in the episode. Escarpment 2017 Kiwa Single Vineyard from Martinborough, $60 and rated 95 points. Pyramid Valley 2016 Field of Fire from North Canterbury, $90 and rated 96 points. And Taimata 2015 Bullnose from Hawke's Bay, $40 and rated 91 points. Subscribe to the Wine Enthusiast Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you find your podcasts. And if you liked today's episode, we'd so appreciate a 5-star review and comment. And please tell your friends to check us out too. For more wine reviews, recipes, guides, and stories, visit Wine Enthusiast online at winemag.com. The Wine Enthusiast Podcast is produced by Marina Vitage and Jenny Groza. Until next episode, cheers.